This video is disturbing and may leave many in tears. For those it is meant for, it will help them prepare and be ready. There's very little time left before what you are about to watch is fulfilled. Pay close attention, read the patterns, connect the dots, and make sure your family and friends are informed. Tell us where you are watching this experience from, so we can continue to pray with you and also connect again as one family. I will now begin reading today's experience. My name is Anjali Sharma, and I am a 39-year-old widow from Mumbai, India. 5 years ago, I lost my husband Brajesh to a sudden heart attack, and since then, it has been just me and my daughter Meera, who is now 11 years old. I never imagined I would be sitting here today, sharing something so personal, so profound, and so urgent with strangers across the world. But after what happened on January 23rd of this year, and after the encounters I have had in recent weeks, I know I cannot remain silent any longer. Before I begin, I want you to understand something about me. I am not someone who seeks attention. I am not a public speaker. I am not a pastor or a prophet. I am simply a mother who works as a school administrator, who goes to church on Sundays, who tries to raise her daughter with faith and values in a world that seems to be losing both. I value my privacy deeply. The thought of sharing this story terrifies me because I know what happens to people who speak about such things online. I have seen how people are mocked, ridiculed, and bullied until they fall into depression. I have seen how keyboard warriors attack anyone who dares to speak about God, about visions, about warnings from heaven. For weeks after what happened to Meera, I wrestled with whether to share this at all. I told myself that maybe it was meant just for us, just for our family. I convinced myself that I could keep this private, that I could protect my daughter and myself from the inevitable backlash. But God has a way of making His will clear, and He has been making it abundantly clear to me that this message is not just for us. It is for everyone who will listen. To understand what happened on January 23rd, you need to know about Meera's ongoing health struggles. Since she was 7 years old, my daughter has suffered from what doctors call periodic fever syndrome. Every few months, sometimes every few weeks, she would develop high fevers that would last for days. They ran every test imaginable, tried different medications, consulted specialists across Mumbai and even in Delhi. Some doctors said it was an immune disorder. Others suggested it might be genetic. No one could give us a definitive answer, and more importantly, no one could cure her. As a mother, watching your child suffer repeatedly and not being able to do anything about it is a special kind of torture. Every time the fever would come, I would see the light dim in her eyes. She would miss school, miss playing with her friends, miss being a normal child. And every time, I would fall to my knees and beg God to heal her. I would cry out to Him in the early morning hours when she was burning up with fever and nothing would bring it down. I would plead with Him during those long nights in hospital emergency rooms. My faith was tested during those years. I will not pretend otherwise. There were moments when I wondered if God was even listening. There were moments when I felt angry, abandoned, confused. Why would a loving God allow a child, an innocent child who had already lost her father, to suffer like this? But even in my doubt, I could never fully let go of my belief. Something deep inside me, deeper than my questions and fears, held on to the conviction that God had a purpose, that He was still in control. January 23rd started like many other difficult days we had experienced over the years. Meera had been feeling unwell since the previous evening. By morning, her temperature was climbing again. I called her school to inform them she would not be attending, cleared my own schedule at work, and settled in for what I expected would be another few days of monitoring her, giving her medications, and praying for the fever to break. That day, I never left her side. I set up my laptop in her room so I could work from there while keeping an eye on her. She slept fitfully throughout the day, waking occasionally to drink water, ate a few bites of the food I had prepared. By afternoon, her fever had spiked higher than usual. I gave her the medications the doctor had prescribed, placed cool cloths on her forehead, and continued to pray. Around 6 p.m., I noticed she seemed more restless than usual. She was tossing and turning, mumbling things I could not quite understand. I checked her temperature again, and my heart sank. It was dangerously high. I immediately called our family doctor, Dr. Turney Patel, who said he would come right away. While waiting for him, I tried to comfort Meera, speaking softly to her, stroking her hair, telling her that help was coming. At exactly 7 p.m., something changed. I remember looking at the clock on the wall because I was calculating how long it would take Dr. Patel to arrive through the evening traffic. That is when Meera suddenly sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide open but not seeming to see me. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Then just as suddenly, she fell back onto the pillows. "Meera," I called out, shaking her gently. "Meera, can you hear me?" There was no response. Her eyes had rolled back, and I could see her chest rising and falling rapidly, too rapidly. Panic seized me. I grabbed my phone and called Dr. Jot Patel again, my voice breaking as I told him to hurry, that something was very wrong. Then I called the emergency number for an ambulance. What happened in the next few minutes felt like both an eternity and an instant. I watched helplessly as my daughter's breathing became more labored, more irregular. Her lips began to turn a slight shade of blue. I was talking to her constantly, begging her to stay with me, promising her everything would be okay, even though I was not sure of anything at that moment. By 7:15 p.m., I noticed that the shallow, rapid breathing was slowing down. At first, I thought maybe she was calming, that perhaps the worst was passing. But then I realized with horror that it was not calming at all. Her system was shutting down. I could see it happening before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Dr. Malther Patel arrived at 7:22 p.m. I remember the exact time because I looked at my phone thinking irrationally that I needed to document everything, that somehow keeping track of time would help me maintain control over a situation that was spiraling beyond my control. He rushed to Meera's bedside and immediately began examining her. I watched his face change as he worked, the professional calm giving way to concern and then to something that looked like alarm. He called for his medical bag, pulled out his stethoscope, listened to her heart, checked her pulse, shone a light in her eyes. Then he looked at me with an expression I will never forget and said we needed to get her to the hospital immediately. The ambulance had not yet arrived, so he said we would take her in his car. He carried Meera's limp body down the stairs while I gathered her medical records and locked the apartment door with shaking hands. The drive to the hospital was a blur of Mumbai traffic, blaring horns, and Dr. Patel on his phone coordinating with the hospital emergency department. I sat in the back seat, cradling Meera's head in my lap, watching her face and praying harder than I had ever prayed in my life. We arrived at the hospital at 7:40 p.m. A team was waiting for us at the emergency entrance. They took Meera from my arms and rushed her into the emergency room. I tried to follow, but a nurse gently but firmly stopped me at the door, telling me I needed to wait outside, that the doctors needed space to work. Through the small window in the door, I could see them surrounding her bed, hooking her up to machines, moving with urgent purpose. Dr. Patel stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. I heard him speaking to me, trying to reassure me, but I could not process his words. All I could do was watch through that window and pray. Then I saw it. The monitor beside Meera's bed, the one showing her vital signs, began displaying numbers that even I, with no medical training, knew were wrong. I saw doctors and nurses moving faster, their voices raised. I saw someone begin chest compressions. I saw the lines on the monitor that should have been jumping with the rhythm of life starting to flatten. I must have made some sound, some cry. Because Dr. Stistens, Patel tightened his grip on my shoulder and pulled me back from the window. Another nurse appeared and guided me to a waiting area, speaking in a soothing tone that I could barely hear over the roaring in my ears. This could not be happening. I had already lost my husband. God could not possibly be taking my daughter too. I do not know how long I sat in that waiting room. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time lost all meaning. I was vaguely aware of Dr. Purple, Paddle coming and going, of other people in the waiting area, of the sounds of the hospital around me. But mostly I was just numb, floating in a space between hope and despair. Then Dr. Pottle was standing in front of me again, and this time his face carried a different expression. Relief, confusion, maybe even wonder. He told me that Meera had stabilized, that her vital signs had returned, that she was breathing on her own again. He said it was remarkable, that by all accounts, she should not have recovered so quickly. That they had been preparing for the worst when suddenly everything just changed. I did not wait to hear the rest. I pushed past him and ran back to the emergency room. This time no one stopped me. I saw Meera lying on the bed, her eyes closed but her chest rising and falling with steady, normal breaths. Tears streamed down my face as I took her hand. It was warm. She was alive. The medical team kept Meera under observation throughout the night. They ran tests, monitored her continuously, trying to understand what had happened. The fever that had been so dangerously high was gone. Her vital signs were normal. It was as if the crisis had never occurred, except that everyone who had been in that room knew it had. I stayed by her bedside all night, dozing occasionally in the chair next to her bed, but mostly just watching her, afraid that if I looked away, something terrible might happen again. Around 3 a.m., she stirred and opened her eyes. She looked around the room, seeming disoriented, and then her gaze found me. "Mama," she whispered. "I am here, Beta," I said, leaning close. "I am right here." She tried to sit up, but I gently pressed her back down. No, you need to rest. You have been very sick." But there was an urgency in her eyes that I had never seen before. "Mama, I need to tell you something." "Something happened." "Shh, it is okay. You can tell me later. Right now, you need to rest." She shook her head, becoming agitated. "No, Mama, you do not understand. I need to tell you now, please." A nurse noticed Meera was awake and came over to check on her. She smiled warmly and told Meera how glad everyone was to see her awake. She adjusted some of the monitoring equipment and told me that Meera seemed to be doing remarkably well, but that she still needed rest. She gave Meera some water to drink and told her to try to sleep. Meera obediently closed her eyes, but the moment the nurse left, she opened them again and looked at me. "Mama, please, I have to tell you what I saw." I wanted to listen. I wanted to hear everything, but I was also worried that whatever she wanted to share might agitate her too much, might cause another episode. So I told her we would talk in the morning, that right now she needed to focus on getting better. She reluctantly agreed, though I could see the frustration in her young face. The next morning, after the doctors had examined her again and expressed their continued amazement at her recovery, after they had run more tests and found everything to be normal, we finally had some quiet time alone. Meera had been moved to a private room, and I had sent word to my office that I would not be coming in for a few days. It was around 8 a.m. when Meera finally told me what had happened. I pulled my chair close to her bed, took her hand, and told her I was ready to listen. She told me that when she had been lying in bed at home, when she had felt her breathing becoming difficult, she had known something was very wrong. She told me she had tried to call out to me, but could not make her voice work. She told me she had felt afraid at first, but then the fear had begun to fade, replaced by something else, something she could not quite name. She revealed to me that suddenly she had seen angels standing around her bed. She described them as being tall, glowing with a soft light, and having faces that were both beautiful and serious. She told me she had counted at least 5 of them, maybe more. She said one of them had looked directly at her and nodded, as if acknowledging that she could see them. She told me that in that moment, she had realized she was no longer in her body. She said she could see herself lying on the bed, could see me beside her, could see my face filled with worry. But she felt no pain, no difficulty breathing, nothing but an incredible sense of peace and lightness. She said the angels seemed to be guiding her, though they did not speak in words. It was more like she just knew where she was supposed to go. She revealed to me that there had been no walls or ceiling in the space where she found herself. Everything seemed open, unlimited. And then she had seen him. She described Jesus standing at a distance, not far but also not immediately close. She said he was not inside the hospital room, but seemed to be in a different space altogether. Yet she could see him clearly without any obstruction. She told me that Jesus had gestured to her, a simple movement of his hand, beckoning her to come to him. She said that gesture carried something she had never felt before in her entire life. She described it as pure love, deeper than anything she had ever known. She said it was compassion so strong it made her want to cry with joy. She said it was mercy so complete that she felt like every mistake, every wrong thing she had ever done or would ever do was forgiven before she even asked. She revealed to me that she had started walking toward him. Or rather, she had felt herself moving toward him without quite walking in the normal sense. She said she passed right through the walls of the hospital room as if they were made of air. She told me she had expected to find herself in the hospital corridor or outside the building. But instead, when she stepped out, she found herself in a completely different environment. This is what she told me next. And this is the part that I struggled to believe at first. The part that made me question whether the fever had caused some kind of hallucination. But as she continued speaking, with such clarity and detail and emotion, I began to understand that my daughter had seen something real, something true, something that God had chosen to show her for a purpose. She told me that the environment she found herself in when she stepped toward Jesus was like being able to see the whole world at once. She said it was not like looking at a map or a picture, but like actually being present everywhere simultaneously. She said she could see cities, countries, oceans all at the same time, and she could understand what was happening in each place. She described it as though layers of reality had been peeled back, allowing her to see not just the physical world, but also the spiritual forces at work behind what was happening on earth. She revealed to me that Jesus had spoken to her then, though again, not in audible words, but in a way that made her understand everything clearly. She said he had shown her that he was about to allow something to happen on the earth, something that would serve as a warning to humanity, a wake-up call to turn back to God before it was too late. She told me that Jesus explained this was not happening because he wanted people to suffer, but because humanity had become so deaf to his voice, so distracted by the temporary things of this world, that only a major disruption could break through the noise and make people pay attention to what truly mattered. She told me she had seen a virus, a sickness that was being created in a laboratory. She described seeing people in white coats working with materials she did not understand, combining things, testing things, creating something that was meant to spread and cause harm. She said she somehow understood that this was not a natural occurrence, but something deliberately made by human hands. She told me the laboratory was pristine, filled with advanced equipment, and the people working there believed they were doing important scientific work. She said they did not all understand the true purpose of what they were creating. Some thought they were developing medical research. Others knew it was meant to be a weapon, but justified it to themselves as necessary for national security or scientific advancement. She revealed to me that the company creating this virus had sponsors, powerful people in high positions within governments. She said she saw men in expensive suits sitting around tables, discussing plans, exchanging money, making agreements. She told me she understood that these people believed they were serving their own interests, gaining power and wealth. But they did not realize they were actually being used by dark spiritual forces that wanted to cause chaos and suffering. She said Jesus showed her that these men thought they were in control, thought they were the masters of their own destinies, but they were actually puppets being manipulated by forces they did not even believe existed. She told me that the virus would begin its spread in China. She was very specific about this. She said she saw a particular city, though she could not tell me its name because she did not know Chinese geography well enough to identify it. She said she saw it starting there, spreading quietly at first, and then being deliberately transferred to other nations. She described seeing how the initial spread would be contained in one area, how authorities would try to keep it quiet, how information would be suppressed and controlled. She said she saw people getting sick in that Chinese city, going to hospitals, being isolated, but the news not reaching the outside world immediately. She revealed to me that the primary target, the place where the virus was intended to cause the most damage, was America. She told me she saw this clearly, that the transfer to America was not accidental but planned. She said she understood there were two main reasons for targeting America specifically. The first reason she told me about had to do with God's promises over that nation. She said Jesus showed her that America, despite all its problems and sins, was still a place where the gospel was preached freely, where missionaries were sent out to the world, where many people still believed in God and Jesus Christ. She said she understood that the enemy hated this and wanted to weaken America's influence in spreading the gospel. She told me that America, for all its flaws and compromises, still had more churches, more Christian broadcasting, more missionary organizations, and more resources dedicated to spreading the gospel than almost any other nation on earth. She said the spiritual forces of darkness knew that if they could cripple America, they could significantly slow down the advancement of God's kingdom worldwide. The second reason she revealed to me was about jealousy and resentment over America's prosperity. She said she saw other nations, other powers, looking at America's wealth and influence with envy. She said these feelings had been exploited by the spiritual forces of darkness to motivate people to take actions that would cause suffering and destruction. She told me that this envy was not just about money or military power, but about the fact that America had been blessed in ways that other nations had not. And this created bitterness in the hearts of leaders and populations who felt they deserved more. She told me she had seen how the virus would spread once it reached America. She described seeing it move from person to person, from city to city, from state to state. She said she saw people becoming sick, very sick, with symptoms that would be frightening and painful. She said she saw hospitals filling up with patients. She described seeing doctors and nurses working tirelessly, exhausted, overwhelmed. She told me that the virus would attack the respiratory system primarily, making it difficult for people to breathe, making them feel like they were suffocating even when their lungs were still partially functioning. She revealed to me that the symptoms would start mild for most people, just like a common cold or flu, which would make it easy for the virus to spread before anyone realized how serious it was. She said people would go about their normal activities, going to work, going to school, going to social gatherings, all while carrying the virus and passing it to others without knowing it. She told me this was part of what made it so dangerous, that by the time people realized they were seriously ill, they had already infected many others around them. She told me she had seen the progression of the illness in those who got very sick. She described how the breathing difficulties would worsen over days, how people would develop high fevers that would not respond to normal medications, how their bodies would begin to ache with a deep, exhausting pain. She said she saw people unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but focus on trying to get enough air into their lungs. She told me that for the elderly, and for those who already had health problems, the virus would be particularly deadly, overwhelming their already weakened systems and shutting down their organs. She revealed to me that she had seen families torn apart by this sickness. She described scenes of people saying goodbye to loved ones through phone screens because they could not be physically present with them. She told me about seeing children confused and scared because they could not understand why their normal life had suddenly changed so dramatically. She spoke of seeing elderly people dying alone without the comfort of family around them. She said this aspect of what was coming troubled her deeply, even as she witnessed it. The cruelty of people being separated from those they loved during the most vulnerable moments of their lives. She told me she had seen the healthcare system struggling to cope with the overwhelming number of sick people. She described hospitals running out of beds, running out of ventilators and other equipment needed to keep people alive, running out of basic supplies like masks and protective gear for the medical staff. She said she saw doctors and nurses having to make terrible decisions about who to treat and who to turn away, because there simply were not enough resources for everyone. She told me she saw medical professionals working double and triple shifts, going days without proper rest, some of them getting sick themselves because they were so exposed to the virus. She revealed to me that the crisis would last much longer than people initially expected. She said she saw that just when it seemed like things were getting better, when the number of sick people would start to decline, The virus would surge again in new waves. She told me this would happen multiple times, creating a cycle of hope and despair that would exhaust people emotionally and psychologically. She said she understood that this was partly because the virus would mutate, would change its characteristics, making it difficult for scientists to develop effective treatments or vaccines. She told me she had seen the economic impact, businesses closing, people losing their jobs, families struggling to pay for basic necessities. She described seeing long lines of cars waiting for food distributions, people who had once been comfortable now facing financial hardship they had never experienced before. She said she saw small businesses that had been built over generations closing their doors permanently because they could not survive months without customers. She told me she saw shopping centers and restaurants sitting empty, workers being laid off by the thousands, people burning through their savings just to pay rent and buy groceries. She revealed to me that the economic devastation would extend far beyond just lost jobs and closed businesses. She said she saw people losing their homes because they could not pay mortgages or rent. She told me about seeing college students having to drop out because their families could no longer afford tuition. She described seeing retirement accounts shrinking as the stock market crashed repeatedly. She said she saw people who had worked their entire lives watching their financial security evaporate in a matter of months. She told me she had seen how the economic crisis would create ripple effects throughout society. She described seeing increased rates of depression and anxiety as people dealt with unemployment and financial stress. She said she saw families experiencing more conflict and tension because of the pressure they were under. She told me about seeing increases in substance abuse as people tried to escape the pain and fear they were feeling. She said she saw rising rates of domestic violence as people who were forced to stay home together in difficult circumstances took out their frustrations on each other. She revealed to me that she had seen the social impact as well. She described people turning against each other, blame and anger spreading almost as fast as the virus itself. She told me about seeing neighbors who had once been friendly becoming suspicious and fearful of each other. She spoke of seeing political leaders using the crisis to increase their own power, to control people through fear. She said she saw society becoming increasingly divided, with people arguing about how to respond to the virus, what measures should be taken, who was at fault, what the government should or should not do. She told me she had seen how this division would become bitter and hostile. She described seeing people unfriending each other on social media over disagreements about the virus. She said she saw relationships ending, families splitting, communities fracturing along ideological lines. She told me that people would accuse each other of being selfish, of being fearful, of being foolish, of being irresponsible. She said she saw that this social division would, in some ways, cause as much damage as the virus itself, destroying the unity and trust that communities need to function well. She revealed to me that she had seen how government responses would vary and would be controversial. She described seeing some places implementing strict lockdowns, forcing people to stay in their homes, closing businesses, restricting travel. She said she saw other places taking a more relaxed approach, trying to keep society functioning normally despite the virus. She told me that both approaches would have serious consequences and would be criticized by different groups of people. She said she saw that whatever measures were taken, some people would think they were too extreme, while others would think they were not enough. She told me she had seen the impact on education. She described seeing schools closing, children being forced to learn from home through computers, parents struggling to help their children with schoolwork while also trying to work from home themselves. She said she saw that this disruption would have lasting effects on children's learning and development. She told me about seeing the loneliness and isolation that children would experience, cut off from their friends and normal activities. She said she saw that some children would fall far behind academically because they did not have the support or resources they needed for remote learning. She revealed to me that she had seen how the virus would affect mental health across society. She described seeing rates of depression and anxiety skyrocketing as people dealt with isolation, fear, uncertainty, and loss. She told me about seeing people struggling with the lack of human connection, the inability to gather with friends and family, the constant worry about getting sick or losing loved ones. She said she saw that the psychological toll of the crisis would be enormous and would continue long after the physical threat of the virus had passed. She told me she had seen people responding in different ways. Some, she said, turned to God in their fear and desperation, crying out for help, seeking answers in the Bible, joining together in prayer, even when they could not meet in person. She described seeing virtual prayer meetings, people gathering online to worship and encourage each other, churches finding creative ways to minister to their congregations despite not being able to meet in buildings. She said she saw that for some people, the crisis would deepen their faith and make their relationship with God more real and vital than it had ever been before. But others, she said, became harder in their hearts, more angry, more convinced that if God existed, He certainly did not care about them. She told me she saw people who had previously claimed to be believers abandoning their faith because they could not reconcile what was happening with their understanding of a loving God. She described seeing churches that had been full before the crisis remaining mostly empty even after restrictions were lifted because people had gotten out of the habit of attending or had lost their faith altogether. She said she saw that the crisis would separate genuine believers from those who had only been following religious traditions without real faith. She revealed to me that she had seen how some people would use the crisis as an opportunity to serve others and demonstrate Christ's love in practical ways. She described seeing believers delivering food to elderly neighbors, checking on isolated people, donating money to help those in financial need, offering emotional support to those who were struggling. She said she saw that these acts of kindness would have a powerful impact, that many people would be drawn to faith because they saw genuine love in action during a time of crisis. But she also told me she had seen how others would become more selfish and self-centered, hoarding supplies, thinking only of their own safety and comfort, becoming angry and demanding when they could not get what they wanted. She said she saw that the crisis would reveal what was really in people's hearts. That pressure and difficulty would expose whether people had been living with genuine faith and character, or whether their good behavior had simply been a result of comfortable circumstances. She told me she had seen how information and misinformation would spread rapidly during the crisis. She described seeing people sharing news articles, videos, and opinions online, some true and some completely false, all mixed together in a confusing jumble that made it difficult to know what to believe. She said she saw that this confusion would add to people's fear and anxiety, that not knowing who or what to trust would make the crisis even more stressful. She told me she saw people believing conspiracy theories, spreading rumors, jumping to conclusions based on incomplete or inaccurate information. She revealed to me that she had seen how the crisis would change society in lasting ways. She described seeing people becoming more aware of hygiene and health, more conscious of how diseases spread, more careful about physical contact with others. She said she saw that some of these changes would be positive, making society healthier and more prepared for future health threats. But she also told me she saw that some changes would be negative, that people would become more isolated, more fearful of others, less trusting and less willing to engage in normal human interaction. But here's the part that shook me to my core. The detail that made me realize this message was urgent and time-sensitive. She told me she had seen a specific date associated with when all of this would begin to unfold. She said she saw the month of February clearly. That February would be when the first major signs would become visible, when the virus would begin its spread in a way that could no longer be hidden or ignored. She did not give me a specific day in February, but she was adamant that it was February. She told me this multiple times during our conversation, stressing that I needed to remember this, that it was important. She said that February would be the month when news would start to break, when governments would start to acknowledge the problem, when the first cases would be confirmed in countries outside of China. She told me that by the end of February, the world would be starting to realize that something serious was happening, though most people would still not grasp the full extent of what was coming. At the time, I am ashamed to admit, I was skeptical. It was late January when she told me this. February was just days away. Surely if something so catastrophic was about to happen, there would already be signs, warnings, news reports. But Meera insisted that this was what she had seen, that February was when it would begin, that I needed to take this seriously and prepare. She told me that the beginning would seem small, that most people would not pay much attention at first, but that it would grow rapidly and soon become impossible to ignore. She revealed to me one more thing that Jesus had shown her about the timeline. She said she had seen that the crisis would not be over quickly, that it would extend through 2020 and into 2021 and beyond. She told me she had seen multiple waves of the virus, seen society struggling to return to normal only to be hit again. She said she had seen that by the time the worst was over, the world would be fundamentally changed, that life would not simply go back to the way it had been before. She told me that Jesus had made it very clear to her that all of this was happening as a warning, as a mercy, as a final call for people to wake up and turn to him before it was too late. She said he had told her that what was coming was difficult, but it was not the end, that it was a birth pain signaling that the true end was approaching. She revealed to me that Jesus had said the virus and its effects were meant to shake people out of their complacency, to make them question what they had been living for, to drive them to seek him while he could still be found. She told me that Jesus had specifically said that believers should not be consumed by fear during what was coming, but should instead see it as an opportunity to demonstrate faith, to minister to others, to share the gospel with people who would be searching for hope and answers. She said he had promised that those who trusted in him would experience his peace and protection, that he would be with them through the crisis, that they would be lights shining in the darkness. This was what my daughter saw. This was what she told me, and as I have watched her recount these things, as I have prayed about them, as I have received my own confirmations from God, I have become convinced that she saw the truth, that this is what is coming, and that we must take it seriously and prepare ourselves spiritually for what lies ahead. After Meera shared all of this with me, after she finally fell into an exhausted but peaceful sleep, I sat in that hospital room struggling with what I had heard. Part of me wanted to dismiss it entirely. My daughter had been gravely ill. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen. She had experienced trauma. Perhaps this was all just her mind's way of processing what had happened to her body. But then the encounter started happening to me directly. This is what finally convinced me that I needed to share Meera's testimony, regardless of my fear of public exposure or ridicule. About a week after Meera came home from the hospital, I was praying one morning, something I did every day but had been doing with renewed intensity since Meera's experience. As I prayed, I suddenly felt an overwhelming presence in the room with me. I cannot describe it any better than that. It was not something I saw with my eyes, but something I felt with my entire being. And with that presence came a message, clear as if someone had spoken it aloud in the room, though I heard it inside my spirit rather than with my ears. The message was simple but profound. What your daughter saw is true. Prepare. Warn others. I opened my eyes and looked around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but I was alone. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that I had not imagined this. God had confirmed to me directly that Meera's vision was real. The second encounter happened a few days later. I was at work, going through some administrative tasks when I had to check some documents that were dated for February. As I looked at the calendar, the entire month of February seemed to stand out to me with an unusual intensity. I felt that same presence again, that same sense of God trying to get my attention. And again, I heard in my spirit, February, watch, prepare. The third encounter was even more specific. I was reading my Bible one evening and I randomly opened to the book of Amos, chapter 3, verse 7, which says, "Surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets." As I read these words, they seemed to leap off the page at me. I felt God impressing upon my heart that he was revealing his plans through warnings and visions like the one Meera had received, and that these warnings were acts of mercy, giving people time to prepare spiritually. The fourth encounter happened just 3 days ago as I am recording this testimony. I was sitting in church during the Sunday service, and the pastor, who knew nothing about what Meera had seen, began preaching about the importance of being ready for Christ's return. He spoke about how God gives warnings before judgment, how he desires that none should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, he said something that made my heart skip a beat. He said, "I feel the Holy Spirit impressing upon me to tell you that we are in a season of urgent preparation. The time is shorter than we think." I sensed that within weeks, not months or years, but weeks, we will begin to see events unfold that will shake the nations. February. He paused, as if listening to something, and then continued. February is going to be significant. I do not know exactly what or how, but I am telling you what I am hearing in my spirit. Get your houses in order. Get right with God. Make sure your relationship with Jesus Christ is genuine and real. I sat there with tears streaming down my face because I knew this was the final confirmation I needed. God was not only showing these things to my daughter or speaking to me in private prayer. He was confirming it through his servants, through multiple witnesses, through repeated signs. That night, I made the decision that I would share Meera's testimony publicly, despite my fears. I realized that my comfort, my privacy, my desire to avoid controversy and criticism, all of these things were insignificant compared to the possibility that someone might hear this warning and turn to God before it was too late. As I come toward the end of this testimony, I want to make a personal plea to everyone who is reading or hearing this message. Please do not ignore this warning. I understand that it is easier to go about your daily life, to focus on your work and your responsibilities, to assume that everything will continue as it always has. I understand the temptation to dismiss this as just another apocalyptic warning from religious people who have been predicting the end of the world for centuries. But what if this time is different? What if this warning is real? What if my daughter really did see what is coming, and God in His mercy gave us a chance to prepare? I am not asking you to quit your job or sell all your possessions or do anything extreme. I am simply asking you to examine your relationship with God. Are you truly saved? Have you truly surrendered your life to Jesus Christ? If you were to stand before God today, would you be ready? I am asking you to pray. Pray for protection for yourself and your family. Pray for wisdom to know how to navigate what is coming. Pray for opportunities to share the gospel with others who need to hear it. Pray for the leaders of nations, that God would give them wisdom and that they would turn to Him for guidance. I am asking you to read your Bible. Do not just take my word or anyone else's word for what it says. Read it yourself. Let God speak to you directly through His word. I am asking you to take your faith seriously. These are not ordinary times. We are living in the season that Jesus warned about, when there would be signs and wonders, when there would be turmoil and chaos, when the love of many would grow cold, but when the gospel would be preached to all nations before the end would come. And I am asking you, if this message resonates with your spirit, to share it with others. You do not have to mention my name or my daughter's name. You do not have to give credit to us. Just share the warning. Tell people that judgment is coming, but that mercy is still available. Tell them that Jesus is returning soon and that they need to be ready. Tell them that what we are about to see is a wake-up call from a God who loves them too much to let them sleep through the alarm. To every believer who reads this, I say, pray. Prepare your heart. Be ready to be a light in the darkness that is coming. Be ready to share hope with those who are desperate. Be ready to point people to Jesus when they are searching for answers. To every person who does not yet know Jesus, I say, this is your wake-up call. This is God reaching out to you in mercy, giving you a chance to turn to Him before it is too late. Do not ignore this. Do not put it off. Surrender to Him today. May God have mercy on us all. May He protect those who trust in Him. May He use what is coming to accomplish His purposes and to bring many souls into His kingdom. And may we all be found faithful when Jesus returns. This is the testimony I was given to share. I have been faithful to deliver it. What you do with it now is between you and God. May His grace and peace be with you. In Jesus' name, Anjali Sharma, Mumbai, India, January 28, 2026.